Welcome to Week 2. This week we start off talking about population ecology. Population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same general area. They rely on the same resources and they interact with each other. Population ecology explores how the organisms, the biotic world, interacts with the abiotic world and influences the distribution, size, and age structure of a population. Populations can be found in several different dispersion patterns. The first is clumped, and you see a diagram there with clumped, and then there's uniform and random. So think about what you think dispersion would be around a certain kind of population. Think about the U.S. population. Is the U.S. population random? Is it regular or is it clumped? What makes a population do that? An ecologist does define a boundary for a population in order to be able to characterize it. And in human population terms, we look at a county, a state, an island. And so in similar ways, we look at animal populations the same way. So here are some graphic pictures or graphics on the clumped, uniform, and random, giving you an example for each. Clumped elephants, also much like humans, would be clumped. They're clumped around resources that they use or in communities where they depend upon each other for survival. And then you see the uniform. Many plant species have uniform distribution. And then random, you see dandelions, and they are just scattered throughout wherever their seeds might germinate. If you look at this chart, it shows you the population characteristics. There are life tables, and there are 3 different kinds of life curves. And if you look at that, the human curve is that there are a few number of individuals born and they last a long time. On the other end of the curve are oysters, and there are millions and millions of oyster larvae released and only a few survive to adulthood. And then you see in the middle the example of a member of the rodent family, which is a fairly high birth rate, but many of them live through time. So there are changes in populations. There are births, immigrations, death, and emigrations, meaning leaving an area. And so population change is the difference. By adding the births and immigration and then subtracting the deaths and emigration, then you develop a percentage of growth. Whether the population is growing as a positive number, and a negative number would result showing that the population was in decline. Age structures are how fast a population grows or declines. It depends on its age structure. In other words, the more of a population that is at a reproductive age, the more potential it has for growing. And if it has many members in a post-reproductive age, then obviously the population would decline. There are certainly limits on population growth. Any population cannot increase indefinitely. The intrinsic rate of increase, R, is the rate it would grow if it had unlimited resources, and carrying capacity is shown as a capital K, and that is the maximum that a species can have in one area and be supported with their habitat. Populations undergo exponential and logistic population growth. One shown here with a J curve and the other shown with an S curve. So with rapidly ample resources, they grow exponentially, and then when resources become limited, the growth rate slows and levels off. So you can see here that exponential growth in this chart over time, and then reaching the carrying capacity, and then the population sort of hovering along that carrying capacity line. The environmental resistance, puts pressure back on once the carrying capacity is achieved, such as there's only so much grass to eat, there's only so much habitat that's viable, water to drink, and various other factors depending on what species we're talking about. So as that population levels off, it fluctuates just above and below the carrying capacity. In some cases, you have an overshot, and you see this often in populations such as white-tailed deer right now. They call boom and bust a lot of insect populations where they will greatly overshoot the carrying capacity, and then you'll see the bust cycle. So it's boom or overshoot is a boom and bust. Sometimes some species have this issue. So again, if they exceed it drastically, they can die, starve, because the resources are not there. And unless they adapt to that carrying capacity, they will obviously, or move, they will obviously either crash completely or go through a series of boom and bust situations. And here's just a closer view of that chart. So over time, species can increase their carrying capacity if they adapt. Again, maybe they choose, instead of one source of food, they're generalists, specialists on one kind of food, they choose to be generalists and eat multiple types of food or something along those lines. They can change to get more out of the habitat they're living in. They can migrate to other areas. And so far, we have actually extended the carrying capacity for humans with the way that we have adapted and or used resources to provide more shelter, to provide more food through farming. So we're a good case study for ways that a species could change and adapt. And then, some species have crowding issues. The number of individuals found in a particular area is its density, and it can certainly affect how rapidly a species can grow or decline. A very crowded area can cause disease to increase and to spread faster, which results in fast decreases in the population. And some factors are not affected by population density, such as weather. There are different types of population change curves in nature because it does vary. It's not the same all the time. It can change erratically. There are stable, eruptive, cyclic, and irregular population changes. For example, they often vary in regular cycles for predator and prey being controlled by a scarcity of resources. So this is a traditional study results of the hare and the lynx that explained why lynx depended on hare and vice versa for populations. And you can see that when there are lots of lynx, the lynx population increases, and when hares are scarce, then the lynx population decreases. And here's it in a larger format. White-tailed deer in the United States have been exploding. We're certainly experiencing that in the East since the 1930s. They were prior to that, in the 20s, they were nearly extinct. And in some cases, they were actually reintroduced. Today, there's 25 to 30 million white-tailed deer, and because of urbanization and our populations being spread all over, there are all kinds of interactions with them, including deer-vehicle collisions and the transmission of Lyme disease. Also, there are reproductive patterns to consider. Some species have asexual reproduction, and they are exact genetic copies of those species, and others have sexual reproduction, where the mixture of genetic material occurs between two individuals. The disadvantage of that is that only females can give birth, and that increases the chance of genetic errors and defects. And courtship and mating rituals can be costly, and that's costly in terms of energy or fitness of that species. The major advantages, obviously, are genetic diversity and offspring survivability. Courtship rituals can be very energy expensive to animals. They can go through some that inflict injury. Sometimes males, we've seen a lot of times videos of male rams ramming their heads together, their horns together, and could be injured that way. And here's a picture of peacocks, which are obviously known for a very bold courtship display. So in the reproductive patterns of animals, there are opportunists and competitors, large number of smaller offspring with little parental care would be something like a cockroach, and fewer large offspring like the rhinoceros with higher invested parental care. So, and that's like humans. You have few numbers of young and take care of them versus insects having many thousands of young and not providing parental care. Then R-selected species tend to be opportunists, while K-selected species tend to be competitors. And then there's a comparison here of the cockroach versus the dandelion, and the dandelion. They're both R-selected species, many offspring, no parental care, reproduce early in life. Small adults, most offspring die before they become of reproductive age. They are generalists. They fluctuate wildly above and below the carrying capacity and have a high population growth rate. K-selected species like the saguaro, the elephant, and humans have fewer larger offspring, lots of parental care, reproduce later in life. Most offspring survive to reproductive age, larger adults, lower population growth rate, specialists, they have a high ability to compete, and they are often late successional species. The way to represent the age structure of a population is with a survivorship curve. Late loss population live to an old age. Constant loss populations die at all ages. So most members of the early loss population die at young ages. And here are those three life survivorship curves that I referred to earlier. And so you see the small fish there, the chub or darter, early loss, they don't live very long. There are many of them that are born. You see a bird there that has constant loss throughout its life, so it dies throughout its life, not at one time. And then you see the rhinoceros or humans or other large animals that live a long time and really lose most of their young at a much later point and become fairly old. Let's look at the human population really quickly. Is this dispersion of people, is it clumped, uniform, or random? What do you think? And look at this, what are we looking at here? What kind of growth is that called? So think about that. Think about if we're reaching our carrying capacity. If we look at humans as a species, there's some interesting things that we can think about. In summary, populations are described by their distribution, size, density, and dispersion. Population dynamics include survivorship, fertility, schedules, and growth. Two dominant life history strategies, R and K, represent evolutionary trade-offs. The human population is clumped, growing unevenly, and the growth can likely not be sustained.